Zaire Washington was a man who had built his world from the ground up. Growing up in a poor neighborhood had shaped him, but it hadn't defined him. With determination, intelligence, and relentless work ethic, he had risen to become the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company. He had all the trappings of success wealth, a grand estate in a quiet, upscale neighborhood, and more respect than he had ever thought possible. But all of that seemed hollow now. His heart still ached from the loss of his wife Maya, 2 years earlier in a car accident. Nothing had ever filled the void her death left behind. His only solace was his 8-year-old son, Jaden. The boy had inherited Maya's sensitive soul and Zaire's sharp intellect. Zaire was proud of him. Jaden excelled in school and loved to read, with an interest in science and space that fascinated him. But he was still a child, and the tragedy of losing his mother at such a young age had left him vulnerable. As Zaire watched his son play with his toys in the living room, he felt a bittersweet pang. Jaden was his world now, and he had made a promise to protect him. "Hey, champ," Zaire said as he ruffled Jaden's dark curls. "You good?" Jaden looked up with wide, thoughtful eyes. "Yeah, Dad," he replied, "just thinking about space stuff. Did you know Jupiter has 79 moons?" Zaire chuckled. "That's a lot of moons, buddy." But beneath the light-hearted conversation, Zaire sensed something off. Jaden had become quieter in recent months, more introspective. Zaire tried to ignore it, convincing himself that his son was simply growing up, but a nagging feeling told him it was more than that. The following week, Zaire sat across from Vanessa James at an upscale restaurant. It was their 5th date, and he was falling for her fast. Vanessa had a magnetic charm about her, the kind of woman who lit up a room the moment she walked in. She was younger than him, with striking beauty, long, flowing hair, blue eyes that sparkled like gems, and a smile that seemed to promise everything Zaire thought he'd lost with Maya. Most importantly, she had a way of making Zaire feel alive again. "Zaire," Vanessa said, leaning in closer across the table, her manicured fingers gently brushing his hand. "I just want you to know how much I admire you. What you've built. It's incredible. And the way you care for Jaden, it's beautiful. You're such an amazing father." Her words were like a balm to his wounded heart. Zaire smiled, feeling the warmth of her approval. It had been a long time since anyone had complimented him like that, made him feel seen beyond his success. "I'm trying my best," Zaire admitted. "Jaden means everything to me." "I know," Vanessa said softly. "And I would love to be a part of his life, to help you both move forward." There it was, that glimmer of hope Zaire had been clinging to. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to let someone else in. Maya would have wanted him to be happy, wouldn't she? A week later, Zaire brought Vanessa home to meet Jaden for the first time. He was nervous. Jaden had been his rock, and Zaire wanted his approval more than anything. The moment Vanessa stepped into their house, she transformed into the image of perfection, kind, sweet, and attentive. Jaden was polite but reserved, clinging to the side of his father. "Hey, Jaden," Vanessa said, bending down to his eye level. "Your dad has told me so much about you. I hear you're really into space." Jaden nodded shyly, his gaze shifting to the floor. "Yeah, I like learning about the planets." "That's awesome. Maybe one day we can go to a space museum together. Would you like that?" Jaden forced a smile, but Zaire could tell his son wasn't thrilled. Later that night, as they sat in Jaden's room getting ready for bed, Zaire asked, "So, what did you think of Vanessa?" Jaden hesitated, fidgeting with the hem of his pajamas. "I don't know, Dad. She's okay, I guess." Zaire felt a slight pang in his chest. He had hoped for more enthusiasm. "I know it's hard to imagine someone new in our lives, but Vanessa really likes you. Give her a chance, okay?" Jaden nodded but didn't say anything more. Zaire kissed him goodnight, but as he closed the door, the uneasy feeling returned. In the following months, Vanessa became more and more involved in their lives. She moved in with them after 6 months of dating, and it wasn't long before she started pushing Zaire to get married. Zaire, lost in the whirlwind of rekindled romance, was considering it. But Jaden saw things differently. When Zaire wasn't around, Vanessa's demeanor shifted. She became distant, cold, and sometimes outright cruel to Jaden. One night at dinner, Jaden tried to engage her in conversation. "Miss Vanessa, do you like science? We learned about the solar system today." Without looking up from her phone, Vanessa replied, "I'm busy right now, Jaden. Eat your dinner." Jaden's face fell. Zaire, busy with work calls that evening, hadn't noticed the change in Vanessa's tone. These moments began to pile up, each one chipping away at Jaden's sense of security. He started spending more time in his room, avoiding Vanessa as much as possible. The turning point came one afternoon when Zaire mentioned that he was thinking of changing his will to include Vanessa, just in case something happened. "Dad," Jaden said, his voice small, "are you sure about her?" Zaire sighed, frustrated. "Jaden, I know this is a big adjustment for you, but Vanessa is good for me. She makes me happy. We need to move on, son." Jaden didn't respond. Instead, he retreated to his room, feeling more alone than ever. The wedding was set for 3 months later. Zaire had proposed, and Vanessa had eagerly accepted. Jaden was asked to be the ring bearer, but every time he imagined the ceremony, a knot formed in his stomach. Something wasn't right, he could feel it deep in his bones. One night, as Jaden lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he overheard Vanessa on the phone. He tiptoed out of his room and stood in the hallway, listening through the cracked door of Vanessa's office. "I told you, Derek, it's all going according to plan. He trusts me completely. Once we're married, well, have access to everything. The will, the insurance, it'll be set. Don't worry about Jaden. Has just a kid." Jaden's heart pounded in his chest. His father was in danger, and no one would believe him. Vanessa was planning something terrible, and he didn't know how to stop it. The days passed, and Jaden's anxiety grew. Every time Vanessa's phone rang, or she stepped out for a meeting, Jaden's mind swirled with questions. Was she meeting Derek? Were they planning more? What was the accident she mentioned? One afternoon, Jaden found himself alone in the house with Vanessa. Zaire was at work, and Vanessa had been making calls in the kitchen all morning. Jaden could feel his heart racing. He thought of confronting her, but quickly dismissed the idea. Vanessa had been clever about hiding her cruelty. No one would believe him without evidence, and he didn't want to tip her off. After lunch, Vanessa went upstairs to take a shower. Jaden saw his opportunity. His hands trembled as he snuck into her office, where she had left her laptop on the desk. He knew he had only minutes. With quick, shaky fingers, he opened it and scanned through her emails. His breath caught when he found one from Derek. It was short but damning. "Can't wait till we're done with the wedding. Insurance policy is signed and filed. Phase 2 starts on the honeymoon. See you soon. D." Jaden's head swam. The proof was right in front of him. They were planning something after the wedding, something bad. His heart pounded in his chest as he quickly forwarded the email to his own inbox. Then, just as he heard the water turn off upstairs, Jaden closed the laptop, wiped his sweaty palms on his jeans, and ran back to his room. That evening, Jaden tried again to talk to his father. It was one of the hardest conversations he'd ever had, knowing that Zaire trusted Vanessa completely. But Jaden had no choice. "Dad, I need to talk to you," Jaden said quietly, looking up at his father with wide, pleading eyes. Zaire sat down on the edge of Jaden's bed, a concerned frown on his face. "What is it, champ? You've been quiet all day." Jaden swallowed hard, his fingers twisting in his lap. "It's about Vanessa? I heard something, and I saw something. She's planning something bad, Dad. She's not who she says she is." Zaire sighed, his face immediately softening with sympathy, but also with weariness. "Jaden, I know this is hard for you. Okay, it's a big change. But Vanessa loves us, son. She's going to be your stepmom, and I need you to try to give her a chance." "No, Dad," Jaden's voice cracked as he tried to hold back tears. "She's lying to you. I saw an email. She's talking to some guy named Derek, and they're planning to hurt you." Zaire's expression tightened, and for a moment he looked frustrated. "Jaden, that's enough. You don't understand everything yet. Vanessa and I have insurance plans because we're getting married. There's nothing suspicious about that." "But Dad, she's—" "Jaden," Zaire interrupted, his tone firmer now. "I need you to trust me on this. Vanessa isn't who you think she is. She's good for us. She's good for me." Jaden felt like the ground had slipped out from under him. He watched his father leave the room, his heart heavy with despair. His dad didn't believe him, and now he was completely alone in this. Determined not to give up, Jaden began to dig deeper into Vanessa's life whenever he could. He started noticing more inconsistencies in her behavior. Sometimes she'd leave the house for long periods, claiming to meet with friends or plan wedding details, but Jaden knew better. He kept close track of her movements, listening when she spoke in hushed tones on the phone, or acted shifty when Zaire wasn't around. Jaden also used any opportunity to access her emails. Each time he found more damning evidence: financial records, hidden conversations with Derek, and the detailed plans for the life insurance policy Zaire had mentioned. Everything pointed to Vanessa's ultimate goal: securing Zaire's wealth and leaving him vulnerable. One day, Jaden found photos of Vanessa and Derek together, pictures of them kissing, holding hands, and looking every bit like a couple. The image burned into Jaden's mind, filling him with rage. Vanessa was not only planning to hurt his dad, but she was also cheating on him with this man. It was all so twisted. He forwarded the pictures to his own email and stored them carefully. This was it. He had what he needed to stop her. The wedding day loomed closer. Jaden's anxiety grew by the hour, his mind constantly buzzing with thoughts of Vanessa's plan. He had tried to convince Zaire, but his father was blind to the truth. The closer they got to the wedding, the more helpless Jaden felt. He couldn't let his dad marry Vanessa, he just couldn't. The night before the wedding, Vanessa caught Jaden sneaking out of her office. He had been checking her laptop again when she walked in, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What are you doing in here?" she asked, her voice ice-cold. Jaden's heart raced. I was just looking for my book. I think I left it in here." Vanessa stared at him, her eyes piercing through his excuse. "She didn't buy it." "Stay out of my office," she said firmly. "And don't get in the way of tomorrow's wedding, or you'll regret it." Jaden ran back to his room, his heart pounding in his ears. The threat in her voice was real, and he knew she was capable of anything. But he had no choice. He couldn't let his father walk into the trap she had set. The morning of the wedding was sunny and warm. The house buzzed with activity as Zaire, Vanessa, and the wedding planners moved about, preparing for the big event. Jaden, dressed in his ring-bearer suit, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Today was the day. If he didn't do something now, it would be too late. The ceremony was set in the beautiful garden of their estate. Guests arrived, dressed in their finest, and soft music played in the background. Jaden stood next to his father, trying to summon the courage to speak up, to tell the truth in front of everyone. He clutched the small ring pillow in his hands, his knuckles white. As Vanessa walked down the aisle, Zaire's face lit up with joy. Jaden watched his father's happiness with a heavy heart. How could Zaire not see it? How could he be so blind to Vanessa's lies? The officiant began the ceremony. The words washed over Jaden, but all he could focus on was the weight of the secret he held. He couldn't wait any longer. Just as the officiant asked if anyone objected to the marriage, Jaden stepped forward, his voice shaking but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I object," Jaden cried out, his voice cracking. The entire crowd gasped. Zaire turned to his son, stunned, his face a mix of confusion and concern. "Jaden, what are you doing?" he whispered. Jaden's heart pounded as he looked up at his father. "Dad, you can't marry her. She's lying to you. She's been planning to hurt you this whole time." As Jaden's voice echoed across the garden, the guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The air buzzed with confusion. Zaire, still in shock, knelt down to his son's level. "Jaden, what are you talking about?" he asked softly, though his face betrayed deep concern. Jaden's hands shook, but he pressed on. "Dad, I found emails. I saw her talking to a man named Derek. She's been lying to you. I saw an insurance policy. If something happens to you after the wedding, she gets millions of dollars and she's cheating on you with him." Vanessa's face turned pale. Her smile disappeared, and for the first time, a flicker of panic crossed her carefully composed features. "Zaire, this is ridiculous," she hissed. Jaden is confused. He doesn't understand what he's talking about. Zaire looked between his son and Vanessa, his heart racing. He wanted to believe Jaden, but he couldn't process the accusations. "Vanessa, what's going on?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vanessa's eyes darkened. She straightened her posture, her smile no longer warm but cold and calculated. "Zaire, honey, this is absurd," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Has just a child. Of course he's going to make things up. He's been having a hard time accepting me in his life." But Jaden wasn't backing down. His hands trembled as he pulled his phone from his pocket. "Look at this, Dad," he said, pulling up the emails he had found on Vanessa's laptop. "I forwarded them to myself. This proves everything I'm saying." Zaire's eyes widened as he scrolled through the messages. He saw the email from Derek, the references to the insurance policy, the sickening plans for an accident. His stomach dropped. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. The woman he had planned to marry was not the person she pretended to be. I don't understand," Zaire stammered, looking at Vanessa with disbelief. "Is this true?" Vanessa took a step back, her facade cracking. "Zaire, listen to me," she said, her voice wavering. "This is all a misunderstanding. Derek? He's just a friend. Those emails are out of context." The crowd was buzzing now. Whispers spread like wildfire, guests exchanging glances, some in disbelief, others watching the drama unfold with wide eyes. The officiant stood frozen, unsure of how to proceed. Vanessa's gaze darted around the garden, her eyes wild with desperation. "We're in love, Zaire. You can't let some jealous child destroy everything we've built." Zaire's heart broke as he looked down at Jaden, then back at Vanessa. His mind raced. He wanted to believe her, but the evidence was staring him in the face. Everything was falling apart. He felt betrayed, not just by Vanessa, but by his own blindness. Vanessa's carefully crafted mask shattered completely. Her voice lost its sweetness, and she glared at Jaden with barely concealed rage. "You spoiled little brat," she spat, her eyes narrowing. "You've ruined everything." The guests gasped, stunned by the venom in her tone. Zaire stood frozen, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had planned to marry, was unraveling before his eyes. "You've been manipulating me this whole time," Zaire said, his voice hollow. "Haven't you?" Vanessa's face twisted with anger, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she turned on her heel and began to storm out of the garden. "I don't have to stand here and be accused like this," she snapped, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're all fools." But before she could make her escape, Zaire's best man, Jared, stepped in front of her. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly, his voice low and commanding. "Not until the police arrive." Vanessa's eyes widened in panic. "What, you can't?" But Jared held up his phone, revealing that he had already called the authorities. "They're on their way," he said coldly. "And when they get here, we'll show them everything Jaden found." Vanessa backed away, her breath coming in short gasps. Her carefully planned world was crumbling around her, and there was no way out. Minutes later, the police arrived. Vanessa tried to maintain her composure, but the cracks were showing. Her hands shook as officers approached her, and she shot one last venomous look at Jaden. "You'll regret this," she muttered under her breath, though her words carried little weight now. Zaire stood by in stunned silence, watching as the woman he thought he loved was handcuffed and led away. His heart felt heavy, his mind clouded with disbelief and sorrow. He had been deceived, and the worst part was that he hadn't listened to his own son when Jaden had tried to warn him. As the crowd dispersed, murmuring about the shocking events they had just witnessed, Zaire turned to Jaden. His face was pale, his eyes filled with regret. "Jaden, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't believe you. I should have listened. You tried to protect me, and I didn't." Jaden shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I just didn't want you to get hurt, Dad. I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner." Zaire pulled his son into a tight hug, holding him close. "You were brave, Jaden," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "You saved me. You did everything right." For the first time in months, Jaden felt a sense of relief wash over him. The weight of the secret he had been carrying was finally lifted. His father believed him, and they were safe. In the weeks following the wedding that wasn't, the Washington household was a place of quiet reflection and healing. Zaire spent time with Jaden, their bond stronger than ever. The betrayal they had endured weighed heavily on both of them, but they were moving forward together. Vanessa and Derek faced charges for conspiracy to commit fraud, and more details about their schemes came to light. They had targeted wealthy individuals like Zaire before, always trying to manipulate their way into financial gain. The legal proceedings were exhausting, but Zaire felt a sense of closure as justice began to unfold. Emotionally, the healing process took time. Zaire started seeing a therapist, working through the guilt and pain of being deceived. He realized that his vulnerability after Maya's death had made him susceptible to Vanessa's manipulation, and it was a hard truth to face. Jaden, too, began to heal. With Vanessa gone, he no longer felt the constant anxiety that had plagued him for months. He started smiling again, laughing more freely, and even finding comfort in the things he once loved, like reading books about space. He no longer felt alone in his suspicions, and the validation from his father meant the world to him. One evening, about a month after everything had happened, Zaire and Jaden sat outside on the porch, watching the sun set over the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, and for the first time in a long time, the silence between them felt peaceful. "Dad," Jaden said quietly, breaking the calm. "Yeah, champ. I'm glad you're okay." Zaire smiled, ruffling Jaden's hair. "Me too, buddy. Me too." Months passed, and slowly, the wounds began to heal. Zaire threw himself into his work, but this time, he didn't let it consume him. He made time for Jaden, and they rebuilt their relationship. The quiet dinners they used to share were filled with laughter once more, and they spent weekends hiking and going to science museums, just the two of them. Jaden, with the support of his father, began to feel more confident. He no longer carried the weight of guilt or fear that had once weighed him down. At school, he opened up to his teachers and friends about the strange, difficult year he had been through. To his surprise, many of his classmates offered support, and he felt more connected than ever. Zaire also realized he had work to do on himself. He attended regular therapy sessions where he explored his emotions and his past. The vulnerability he'd felt after Maya's death had made him eager to fill the void, and he had fallen prey to Vanessa's manipulation because of it. But therapy helped him see that healing didn't mean rushing into something new. It meant taking the time to understand his own pain and letting himself process it. Vanessa and Derek's trial became a media spectacle. Zaire was called to testify, and his words held weight in the courtroom. He recounted the lies, the manipulation, and the betrayal he had suffered. Jaden, too, was a key witness, bravely sharing how he had discovered the truth and brought it to light. The trial was long and emotionally exhausting, but in the end, Vanessa and Derek were found guilty of fraud and conspiracy. The judge handed down a lengthy sentence, ensuring they wouldn't harm anyone else. Zaire and Jaden didn't celebrate their victory with fanfare. Instead, they quietly moved on, knowing that justice had been served, and that was enough. With the trial behind them, Zaire and Jaden focused on building their future. They started new traditions, weekend trips to national parks, stargazing at night, and sharing their favorite books. Their bond, which had been tested in the most brutal of ways, was now stronger than ever. Zaire found joy in the little things again. He cooked breakfast for Jaden every morning, and they spent evenings watching movies or working on Jaden's school projects. They both found comfort in the routine, knowing that no matter what, they had each other. Jaden also began to flourish in school, finding confidence in his abilities and his voice. He excelled in science and even entered a school competition for building model rockets, winning first place. His passion for space deepened, and Zaire encouraged it every step of the way. A year after the interrupted wedding, Zaire began cautiously re-entering the dating world. This time he was careful. He was honest with Jaden about his relationships, and they communicated openly about how they felt. Zaire made sure that any woman he met knew how important Jaden was to him. While it was difficult for Zaire to trust again, he found that taking things slowly helped him rebuild his confidence. Jaden, too, felt more secure, knowing that his father valued their relationship above all else. On the one-year anniversary of the almost wedding, Zaire and Jaden decided to create a new tradition. They packed a picnic and drove to a state park, spending the day hiking, fishing, and enjoying the peaceful surroundings. As they sat by a campfire that evening, watching the stars twinkle in the sky, Zaire felt a sense of peace. The past year had been filled with betrayal, heartbreak, and healing, but they had come through it stronger, Dad Jaden said, looking up at the stars. I think things are finally okay. Zaire smiled, wrapping an arm around his son's shoulders. Yeah, champ, I think they are. And as the fire crackled and the cool night air settled around them, both father and son knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. She continued, pouring her heart into every word. We demand change. We demand accountability. And we won't stop until every child in this district is treated with respect, with kindness, and with the dignity they deserve. The protest stretched into the afternoon, and by the end of the day, the district had no choice but to respond. They announced that they would open an investigation into the school's disciplinary practices. It wasn't everything Vanessa had hoped for, but it was a start. The district's announcement of an independent investigation brought a sense of cautious optimism to Vanessa and the other parents. Finally, after weeks of fighting, they were starting to see real progress. But Vanessa knew better than to relax. The investigation, led by an outside consulting firm, promised a thorough review of the school's disciplinary methods. But as the process dragged on, it became clear that the district wasn't in any hurry to make changes. Meetings were delayed, reports were pushed back, and the administration remained frustratingly vague about their timeline. Vanessa's patience wore thin. She had come too far to let the district brush this under the rug. One evening, as she sat with Mark Stone in his office, she voiced her concerns. They're stalling, she said, her frustration evident. They're trying to wait us out. Mark nodded. That's a common tactic. They hope you'll lose momentum, that people will stop paying attention. Vanessa shook her head. That's not going to happen. We're not going away. Mark smiled. Good. Because we've got another card to play. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Mark leaned forward. We're going to file a class action lawsuit. This isn't just about Ethan anymore. It's about every child who's been mistreated by the school, and we're going to hold them accountable. Vanessa had been hopeful when the district announced the investigation. It felt like a victory finally. Someone was taking the situation seriously. But as the days turned into weeks, her optimism began to fade. The district's responses became more vague, meetings were repeatedly postponed, and any updates on the investigation were minimal at best. At first, Vanessa tried to remain patient. She kept in contact with Mark Stone, who reassured her that these things took time. But each delay felt like another slap in the face. And worse, while they waited, Ethan was still suffering. The isolation had stopped, but the damage was already done. Ethan's confidence remained shattered, and his anxiety about school persisted. Vanessa wasn't alone in her frustration. Sarah Rodriguez, Chris Jefferson, and the other parents in the group were growing increasingly angry. They held meetings in Vanessa's living room, exchanging updates and discussing their next moves. The longer the district dragged its feet, the more the group began to splinter. Some parents, worn down by the endless waiting, started to lose hope. This isn't going anywhere, Chris said one evening, his voice edged with frustration. They're stringing us along. They don't care. They're hoping we'll give up, Vanessa said, her voice tight with anger. And that's exactly why we can't. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, Sarah admitted, looking exhausted. Sophia's doing better now, and I don't want to drag her through this anymore. The tension in the room was palpable. Vanessa understood their frustration. It felt like they were stuck in a never-ending battle, and the strain was starting to take its toll on everyone. But Vanessa couldn't back down. She had come too far, and Ethan's struggles were still raw and ever-present in her mind. I get it, Vanessa said, looking around at the group. This is hard. But if we give up now, everything we've done so far will be for nothing. The district wants us to quit. They're waiting for it. But I'm not going to let them win. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room was silent. Slowly, the other parents nodded in agreement, though their resolve seemed more fragile than before. Vanessa knew she couldn't let their momentum falter, but the weight of the fight was becoming heavier by the day. Ethan's emotional recovery was slow, and every setback broke Vanessa's heart a little more. He was still going to school, but he no longer enjoyed it. The boy who used to wake up eager to learn now dragged his feet every morning, his once bright eyes dulled by the weight of his fear and anxiety. At night, Vanessa would find Ethan sitting silently in his room, staring at his homework without touching it. She sat beside him, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "Ethan, sweetheart, what's wrong?" she asked softly. Ethan shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "I don't know, Mama. I just don't want to go to school anymore." Vanessa's heart clenched. "I know it's been hard, baby, but I promise things are going to get better." Ethan looked up at her, his eyes filled with doubt. "What if they don't?" Vanessa swallowed the lump in her throat. She didn't know how to answer that. What if they didn't get better? She had been fighting so hard, but every day it felt like the system was working against them. And all the while, Ethan was the one paying the price. "Things will get better," Vanessa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm not going to stop fighting for you. We're going to fix this, okay?" Ethan nodded, but Vanessa could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. She kissed his forehead and pulled him into a hug, silently vowing to do whatever it took to restore his confidence. The days blurred together in a haze of frustration and exhaustion. Vanessa was burning the candle at both ends, working 2 jobs, attending school meetings, coordinating with Mark on the legal case, and taking care of Ethan. The stress weighed on her like a physical burden, and it felt like no matter how hard she fought, nothing was moving forward. One night, after putting Ethan to bed, Vanessa sat down at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. The weight of everything suddenly felt unbearable. She had been fighting for so long, months of pushing, organizing, advocating, and she was running on empty. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stared at the pile of documents in front of her legal papers, emails from the school district, and notes from her meetings with other parents. It all felt like too much. The investigation was dragging on, and every step forward seemed to come with another setback. Vanessa felt like she was failing Ethan, failing the other parents, failing herself. Her mind raced with thoughts of doubt. What if they never got justice? What if Ethan never recovered from this? What if, despite everything, nothing changed? In that moment, sitting alone in her quiet apartment, Vanessa felt utterly defeated. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly into the silence. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her exhaustion. She had been holding it together for so long, putting on a brave face for Ethan and the other parents. But now, in the quiet darkness of her kitchen, she couldn't hold it in any longer. After what felt like hours, Vanessa finally lifted her head, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Her heart still ached, but the tears had brought a sense of clarity. She couldn't give up, not now, not ever. If she stopped fighting, the school district would win. And more importantly, Ethan would lose. Vanessa took a deep breath and straightened up. There was no other option. She had to keep going for Ethan's sake and for every child who had been mistreated. A few weeks later, after what seemed like endless waiting, Vanessa got the call she had been hoping for. "We have a decision," Mark Stone said over the phone, his voice calm but serious. "The district's investigation is complete, and the findings are in our favor." Vanessa's heart raced. What did they say? They found evidence of discriminatory disciplinary practices, specifically targeting students with higher energy levels, students of color, and those with learning differences. Miss Dawson's conduct has been deemed inappropriate, and the district is implementing immediate changes. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. "They're actually changing the policies." "Yes," Mark replied. "The isolation cubicles are being removed, and the district will implement restorative justice practices instead. There's also going to be mandatory training for teachers on cultural competency and how to handle diverse learning needs." A wave of relief washed over Vanessa, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could finally breathe again. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a huge step forward. "What about Miss Dawson?" Vanessa asked. "She's being placed on administrative leave pending further investigation," Mark said. "There's still more to be done, but this is a big win." Vanessa thanked Mark and hung up the phone, tears welling up in her eyes. After months of fighting, they had finally made progress. The school was going to change because of her, because of Ethan, because of all the parents who had refused to back down. That evening when Ethan came home from school, Vanessa sat him down and told him the news. "They're changing things at school, Ethan," she said, smiling through her tears. "They're getting rid of the cubicles, and they're going to make sure no one is treated the way you were." Ethan looked up at her, his eyes wide. "Really? Really, baby?" Vanessa said, pulling him into a tight hug. "We did it!" Ethan smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. Vanessa held him close, her heart swelling with pride. They had fought a long, hard battle, and it wasn't over yet. But for the first time, they had hope. In the weeks that followed, the changes at the school became more apparent. The district rolled out its new policies, and the isolating cubicles were removed from classrooms. Teachers began undergoing training on how to handle students with diverse learning styles, and a renewed focus on inclusivity and respect spread throughout the school. Ethan slowly started to come back to life. It wasn't an overnight change, he still struggled with anxiety. And there were days when school felt like a burden, but the dark cloud that had been hanging over him began to lift. Vanessa could see the difference in his demeanor. He smiled more, played outside again, and even started talking about his friends at school. One afternoon, as they walked home together, Ethan looked up at his mom with a small smile. "Mama, school's getting better," he said softly. Vanessa's heart swelled. "I'm glad, baby. I'm so proud of you." Ethan grinned. "I'm proud of you too, Mama. You're my hero." Tears filled Vanessa's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. She had fought for her son, for every child in that school, and they had won. The changes at the school were significant, but for Vanessa, it wasn't just about new policies, it was about accountability. She needed the school to admit the harm they had caused, to acknowledge the pain that Ethan and so many other children had endured. And finally, that day came. Vanessa sat in the auditorium of Lincoln Elementary, alongside other parents who had been fighting for the same justice. The school had organized a public meeting, inviting parents, teachers, and community members to hear the results of the district's investigation and the steps they were taking to rectify the situation. Principal Harper stood at the podium, looking more worn and humble than Vanessa had ever seen him. His usual authoritative presence had softened, replaced by what seemed to be genuine remorse. "We're here today to address the concerns that many of you have raised over the past months," he began, his voice steady but subdued. "We've listened to you, and we've seen the impact of our actions. We realize now that our disciplinary methods were not only ineffective, but harmful to our students. For that, I want to personally apologize to all the children and families who were affected." Vanessa's heart pounded in her chest as she listened. She wasn't sure if an apology would ever come, but hearing those words felt like a validation of everything they had fought for. Principal Harper continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "We've learned from this experience, and we're committed to making sure that no child in our school ever feels isolated, humiliated, or unworthy again. We're implementing restorative justice practices, increasing teacher training, and working closely with parents to ensure that every student is treated with respect and dignity." The room was silent for a moment as his words sank in. Vanessa looked around at the other parents, some of whom had tears in their eyes. She squeezed Ethan's hand, feeling a mix of emotions, relief, pride, and a lingering sadness for what her son had been through. But most of all, she felt a sense of closure. It wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about making sure that this never happened to another child again. And now, it felt like they were finally on the path toward real, meaningful change. A few months later, the atmosphere at Lincoln Elementary had shifted dramatically. The once cold, sterile environment had been transformed into a place of warmth and inclusivity. The cubicles were gone, replaced by collaborative learning spaces where children could interact and support each other. Teachers had undergone extensive training in how to work with students who had diverse learning needs. They were encouraged to use positive reinforcement rather than punitive measures, and the entire school had adopted a philosophy of restorative justice, where conflicts were resolved through dialogue and understanding rather than punishment. For Ethan, the change had been slow but steady. He was still healing from the emotional scars of the past year, but the improvement was undeniable. His anxiety about school had lessened, and he was beginning to regain the confidence he had lost. One afternoon, Vanessa sat in the school courtyard, watching Ethan play with his friends. His laughter rang through the air as he chased after a soccer ball, his face bright with joy. It was a sight that Vanessa hadn't seen in what felt like a long time, and it filled her with hope. "Looks like things are finally turning around," said a voice beside her. Vanessa turned to see Sarah Rodriguez, smiling as she watched her own daughter, Sophia, playing nearby. "They are," Vanessa agreed, smiling back. "It's taken time, but I think we're finally seeing the results of everything we fought for." Sarah nodded. "I'm glad we stuck it out. There were times when I wasn't sure we'd make it." Vanessa sighed, the weight of the past month still fresh in her mind. "There were times I wanted to quit too, but I couldn't. Not for Ethan." Sarah glanced at her, her expression thoughtful. "You know, you were the one who kept us going. Without you, I don't think we would have gotten this far." Vanessa shook her head modestly. "It wasn't just me. We all did this together." Sarah smiled, but there was no denying the truth in her words. Vanessa had been the driving force behind their movement, the one who had refused to back down, even when the fight seemed impossible. And now, because of her, their children were finally getting the education and care they deserved. A few weeks later, Vanessa received a letter in the mail from the school district. The letter was an invitation, asking her to speak at a district-wide conference on education reform. The district wanted her to share her experience and the journey that had led to the changes at Lincoln Elementary. Vanessa was both honored and nervous. She had never seen herself as a public speaker. She was just a mother who had fought for her child. But she also knew how important it was to continue sharing their story, to inspire other parents and educators to stand up for what was right. When the day of the conference arrived, Vanessa stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces. Teachers, administrators, and parents from across the district were gathered to hear her speak. She took a deep breath and began. "When I started this journey, I was just a mom trying to protect her son," Vanessa said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Ethan was being punished for simply being who he was, an active, curious little boy. And the methods that were being used against him weren't helping him learn. They were hurting him. She paused, gathering her thoughts as the room listened in silence. But I wasn't alone. Other parents were going through the same thing. And together we realized that we had the power to demand change. We refused to accept that this was how things had to be. Vanessa looked out at the crowd, her heart swelling with pride. We stood up for our children. We fought for their right to be treated with respect, to be valued for who they are. And because of that fight, things are changing. Our kids are happier, they're thriving, and they're excited about learning again. As she finished her speech, the room erupted into applause. Vanessa smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known before. She had fought for her son, but in doing so, she had also helped change the system for so many other children. The changes at Lincoln Elementary didn't just stop at the school. Word of the reforms began to spread, and other schools in the district started adopting similar practices. The district's move toward restorative justice and inclusive education became a model for schools across the region. Vanessa's story was featured in local newspapers, and soon after, a national education magazine picked it up. Her fight for Ethan's well-being had sparked a movement that was now inspiring parents and educators across the country. Vanessa never set out to be an advocate, but as more people reached out to her, seeking advice and guidance, she realized how much impact her voice could have. She began speaking at other conferences, sharing the lessons she had learned, and encouraging parents to fight for their children's rights. It only takes one person, Vanessa would say in her speeches. One person to say, enough. One person to stand up and refuse to accept injustice. And when we come together, that's when real change happens. As the months passed, Vanessa watched with joy as Ethan's confidence grew. He was no longer the anxious, withdrawn boy who dreaded going to school. He had rediscovered his love for learning, and his excitement for life had returned. One evening, as Vanessa was preparing dinner, Ethan came into the kitchen with a huge grin on his face. "Mama," guess what he said? bouncing on his toes. "I got an award today?" Vanessa turned around, smiling at his enthusiasm. "An award for what?" "For being a good friend," Ethan exclaimed, holding up a certificate. "Miss Carter said I always help other kids and make them feel happy." Vanessa's heart swelled with pride. She knelt down and pulled Ethan into a hug, holding him close. "I'm so proud of you, Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're such a good boy. You've always been." Ethan beamed up at her, and in that moment, Vanessa felt like everything they had been through, the struggles, the pain, the fight had been worth it. As the school year drew to a close, Vanessa reflected on how far they had come. What had started as a personal fight for her son had transformed into something much bigger, a movement that had changed the lives of countless children and families. Vanessa knew there was still work to be done. There were other schools, other districts, where children were facing the same struggles that Ethan had. But she was no longer afraid of the fight. She had found her voice, and she knew that she could make a difference. On the last day of school, Vanessa and Ethan stood in front of a mural that had been painted by the students and teachers. It depicted children of all backgrounds, hand in hand, under a bright rainbow. Across the top, the words "Every Child Matters" were written in bold, colorful letters. "We helped paint that," Ethan said proudly, pointing to the mural. "It's to remind everyone that we're all special, even if we're different." Vanessa felt a lump in her throat as she looked at the mural. It was a symbol of everything they had fought for, a reminder that every child deserved to feel valued and respected. As they walked away, Vanessa smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning. They had started a revolution, and that revolution would continue to ripple outward, touching the lives of children everywhere. And it had all begun with one mother's fight for her son. The following school year began with a noticeable shift in Ethan's demeanor. Vanessa watched with pride as her son woke up each morning with excitement in his eyes. Gone were the days when she had to coax him out of bed, battling his reluctance and fear. Now, Ethan was eager to start each day, ready to face new challenges and explore the world around him. One crisp autumn morning, as Vanessa packed Ethan's lunch, he came into the kitchen, his backpack already slung over his shoulder. He sat down at the table, swinging his legs back and forth as he spoke. "Mama, we're starting a new science project today," Ethan exclaimed, his eyes sparkling. "Miss Carter said we get to build our own volcanoes." Vanessa smiled, her heart swelling with joy. It had been months since the turmoil with the school, but Ethan's transformation still filled her with awe. He had come so far from the scared, withdrawn boy he had once been. Now he was thriving, eager to learn, eager to participate, eager to be himself. "That sounds amazing, sweetheart," Vanessa said, handing him his lunch. "I can't wait to see your volcano." Ethan grinned, his face lighting up. "I'm going to make it explode with baking soda and vinegar. Miss Carter said I'm really good at science." As they walked to the school together, Vanessa reflected on how much had changed. The school's new policies had created an environment where Ethan could flourish, and Vanessa knew that this was only the beginning of his journey. He had found his confidence again, and more importantly, he had found his love for learning. A few months later, Vanessa stood backstage at the National Education Reform Conference, her heart pounding in her chest. The auditorium was filled with teachers, administrators, policymakers, and parents from all over the country. The energy in the room was electric, and Vanessa could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. This was her chance to make a difference, not just for Ethan, but for every child who had been hurt by a broken system. When her name was called, Vanessa stepped onto the stage, the bright lights blinding her for a moment. She walked to the podium, her hands gripping the edges as she looked out at the sea of faces before her. For a moment, she felt overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. But then she thought of Ethan, and the courage he had shown in facing his fears. If he could do it, so could she. "My name is Vanessa Parker," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I'm a mother, an advocate, and a fighter. But most of all, I'm someone who refused to let the system break my child." The room was silent as Vanessa spoke, sharing the story of Ethan's isolation, his anxiety, and the fight that had brought about change at Lincoln Elementary. She talked about the power of a mother's love, the importance of standing up for what was right, and the responsibility that educators had to nurture, not punish, the children in their care. As she spoke, she could feel the audience hanging on her every word, their expressions filled with empathy and understanding. By the time she finished, the room erupted into applause. Vanessa stepped back from the podium, her heart racing. She had done it. She had shared her story, and now it was up to the world to take that story and use it to create change. In the months that followed the conference, Vanessa's influence continued to grow. Schools across the country began to adopt the restorative justice practices that had been implemented at Lincoln Elementary. Teachers were trained to recognize the emotional needs of their students, and punitive measures were replaced with more compassionate approaches to discipline. Vanessa became a full-time advocate, working with school districts, parent groups, and lawmakers to push for national reforms in education. She traveled to different states, speaking at town halls, schools, and community centers, sharing her story and empowering others to take action. Ethan, meanwhile, continued to thrive. He excelled in his classes, made new friends, and grew into a confident, kind-hearted young boy. Every day, Vanessa watched him with pride, knowing that their fight had not only changed his life, but had also paved the way for a brighter future for so many other children. One day, as Vanessa and Ethan walked home from school, he turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "Mama, do you think other kids will have to fight like we did?" he asked. Vanessa smiled softly, squeezing his hand. "I hope not, sweetheart. That's why we did what we did, so that other kids don't have to go through what you went through." Ethan nodded, his face serious. "I want to help other kids too, Mama. I want them to know that it's okay to be different." Vanessa felt a lump in her throat as she looked at her son, so wise beyond his years. "You already are helping, Ethan. By being yourself, you're showing other kids that they can be themselves too." Years later, as Vanessa reflected on everything they had been through, she realized that their fight had become more than just a personal battle. It had become a movement for justice, for compassion, and for the belief that every child, no matter their background or abilities, deserved to be treated with respect. Ethan had grown into a bright, empathetic young man, and Vanessa couldn't have been prouder of him. He had faced challenges that no child should have to face, but he had come out of it stronger, more resilient, and more determined to make a difference in the world. And Vanessa, once an ordinary mother just trying to protect her son, had found her purpose. She had discovered the power of her voice and the strength that came from standing up for what was right. As she sat in her home, surrounded by pictures of Ethan's school days and the countless awards and letters of appreciation she had received over the years, Vanessa knew that their story was far from over. There would always be more battles to fight, more children to protect, more systems to change. But she also knew that they had made a lasting impact. They had changed not just one school, but an entire community. And their story would continue to inspire others for generations to come. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Back home, Vanessa continued her work on the ground, collaborating with local parent groups and educators to implement the changes she had fought for. She helped organize workshops for teachers on restorative justice practices and built connections with local leaders to ensure that school reforms were being upheld. One of the most rewarding parts of Vanessa's journey was seeing the difference it made for children who had once felt like outcasts. She was approached by a mother at one of her workshops, Karen Davis, who shared a familiar story. "My son Tyler was going through the same thing as Ethan," Karen explained, her voice emotional. "He's been singled out for his ADHD, and they kept punishing him for things he can't control. I didn't know what to do, but after hearing your story, I realized I could fight for him too. Now, things are better for him at school. Thank you for giving us the courage to speak up." Vanessa's heart swelled with emotion. Hearing these stories reminded her that every step of her journey had been worth it. She wasn't just changing policies, she was changing lives. And with every new success, she felt more determined to continue the work. Vanessa also began reaching out to school administrators, including Principal Harper. Their relationship had been strained during the initial fight, but in the months since the reforms had been implemented, Harper had undergone a transformation of his own. He now actively participated in the new training programs and was a key figure in promoting restorative justice practices within the school. During one of their meetings, Harper approached Vanessa with a thoughtful expression. "I've learned a lot over the past year," he admitted. "At first I was resistant to the changes, but seeing the impact it's had on the students, I can't deny it's been for the better. I'm sorry for the way things were handled with Ethan." Vanessa accepted his apology, grateful that they could move forward. "It's not about blame anymore," she said. "It's about making sure no child feels like they don't belong. We're all learning together." As the years passed, Ethan continued to grow and flourish in the newly transformed school environment. He excelled academically, but more importantly, he thrived emotionally and socially. His teachers praised his leadership and empathy, noting how he often went out of his way to help classmates who were struggling. Vanessa watched with pride as Ethan became more confident and self-assured. His experience of being isolated and mistreated had shaped him into a compassionate young man who was determined to stand up for others. One afternoon, Vanessa received a call from Ethan's teacher, Miss Carter, who had been instrumental in his recovery. "Mrs. Parker, I just wanted to let you know that Ethan has been selected for a special leadership program," Miss Carter said. "He's shown such incredible growth and maturity, and we think he would be a great mentor for younger students who are struggling." Vanessa smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. "That's wonderful news. I'm so proud of him." The leadership program was designed to pair older students with younger children who were facing similar challenges. Ethan, having experienced the pain of isolation, was eager to help others avoid the same fate. He became a mentor to a shy first grader named Daniel, who had trouble adjusting to school life. Over time, Vanessa watched as Ethan helped Daniel come out of his shell, encouraging him to participate in class and make new friends. It was a full-circle moment for Vanessa, who saw in Daniel the same struggles that Ethan had once faced. One evening, as they sat together at the dinner table, Ethan spoke up, his voice thoughtful. "Mama, I think I want to be a teacher when I grow up," he said, his eyes bright with determination. "I want to help kids like Daniel. I want them to know that they're not alone." Vanessa's heart swelled with pride. "You'd make an amazing teacher, Ethan." She knew that Ethan's experiences had shaped him in ways that would last a lifetime. He had faced adversity and come out stronger, more compassionate, and ready to make a difference in the world. Vanessa's advocacy work began to take on a life of its own. What had started as a personal fight for Ethan had evolved into a nationwide movement for educational reform. Parent groups across the country adopted the frameworks she had helped establish, and Vanessa's influence reached even farther than she had ever imagined. One day, she was approached by an education nonprofit that wanted to partner with her to launch a new initiative, Every Child Matters, a program aimed at providing resources and support for parents, teachers, and students affected by harmful disciplinary practices. The organization offered Vanessa a leadership role in the initiative, allowing her to expand her work on a much larger scale. Vanessa accepted the offer, knowing that this was the next step in her journey. She would be able to help families across the country navigate the same struggles she had faced, and ensure that no child was left behind in an education system that too often overlooked their needs. The launch of Every Child Matters was a major success, and the program quickly gained national recognition. Vanessa traveled to different states, speaking to school boards, attending community meetings, and advocating for legislative changes to protect children from punitive discipline. Through it all, Vanessa remained grounded in her mission to fight for children like Ethan, to ensure they had a voice, and to create a world where every child could thrive in an environment that nurtured their strengths. Years passed, and Vanessa's work became a cornerstone of the national education reform movement. Her story was featured in documentaries, news articles, and education forums. But no matter how much recognition she received, Vanessa remained focused on the children who were at the heart of her fight. Ethan grew into a confident young adult, excelling in his studies and continuing his advocacy work alongside his mother. He went on to pursue a degree in education, determined to become the kind of teacher who would never let a child feel the way he once had. On the day of Ethan's high school graduation, Vanessa sat in the audience, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son walk across the stage. The journey they had been on, the challenges, the heartbreak, the triumphs, had all led to this moment. As Ethan accepted his diploma, he looked out into the crowd and found his mother's eyes. He smiled, and Vanessa knew that this was not the end of their story, but the beginning of a new chapter. Vanessa's fight had become more than just a battle for her son's well-being. It had become a legacy, a movement that would continue to ripple through schools, communities, and families for generations to come. As they walked out of the ceremony together, Ethan turned to Vanessa, his voice filled with gratitude. "Mama, you changed everything," he said softly. "For me, for everyone." Vanessa smiled, her heart full of pride and love. "We did it together, Ethan, and we're not done yet." With that, they stepped into the future, ready to continue their fight hand in hand. With Every Child Matters gaining momentum nationwide, Vanessa's work was far from done. As her influence grew, so did the number of communities that wanted to adopt the reform model she had championed. Schools in cities and rural towns alike began reaching out, asking for help in transforming their outdated disciplinary systems. Vanessa, now a full-time advocate and director of the initiative, found herself traveling more than ever. She visited schools across the country, from urban districts struggling with overcrowding to small rural schools where resources were scarce. In each place, Vanessa shared her story and offered the support necessary to create lasting change. One of her visits took her to Robinson Middle School, a struggling institution in a small rural town. The school's principal, Ms. Clara Richardson, had reached out after hearing about the success of Lincoln Elementary's reforms. "Vanessa, we've been trying to implement new policies, but it's hard, Ms. Richardson admitted during their first meeting. "The teachers are used to doing things the old way, and they're resistant to change. We need your help to show them a better way." Vanessa could see the challenges ahead, but also the potential for transformation. She knew that schools like Robinson were the most in need of support, and that the change would only come if the entire community came together. Over the next few months, Vanessa worked closely with the school staff, conducting workshops and providing resources. She met with parents, many of whom had felt powerless to speak up for their children. Together, they built a support system that would hold the school accountable and create a nurturing environment for students. Slowly but surely, the changes took root. Teachers began using restorative justice practices, and the students, once disengaged and fearful of punishment, became more involved in their learning. By the end of the year, Robinson Middle School had become a model for other schools in the region. Ms. Richardson thanked Vanessa tearfully at the year's final meeting. "You've shown us what's possible when we believe in our students and work together. We couldn't have done this without you." Vanessa smiled. "You did it. I was just here to show you how." Vanessa had learned early in her journey that one voice could make a difference, but many voices together could create a movement. She began to focus on bringing parents, teachers, and communities together to build networks of support across the country. She knew that the key to sustaining change wasn't just in implementing new policies, but in creating a community of advocates who could carry the work forward. Through Every Child Matters, Vanessa organized a series of conferences where parents, educators, and activists could come together to share their stories, learn from one another, and build coalitions. These gatherings became a powerful force for change, spreading the message of inclusive, compassionate education far and wide. At one of these conferences, Vanessa met Tanya Bennett, a single mother from Chicago who had faced similar struggles with her son Jordan, who had been unfairly punished at school for acting out due to his undiagnosed ADHD. Tanya's story echoed Vanessa's own, and the two women quickly bonded over their shared experiences. "I didn't know I had the power to fight back," Tanya said, her voice full of emotion. "But hearing your story, Vanessa, gave me the courage to speak up for Jordan. Now he's getting the help he needs, and I'm not going to stop fighting until every child gets the support they deserve." Vanessa hugged Tanya, moved by her strength and determination. "That's exactly why we're doing this," she said. "You're not alone in this fight. None of us are." The conferences continued to grow, attracting thousands of participants from all walks of life. Vanessa saw firsthand the power of community, how parents, teachers, and students could come together to create lasting change. They shared strategies, offered encouragement, and built networks that spanned the country. Together, they were unstoppable. With the widespread success of Every Child Matters and the growing public demand for change, policymakers began to take notice. Vanessa had been in and out of meetings with education officials, advocating for the national implementation of restorative justice practices and mental health support for students. But now, the conversations were turning into something more tangible, a potential education reform bill that could change the way schools across the nation approach discipline. One afternoon, Vanessa received a phone call from Senator Thomas Miller, who had become a key ally in her efforts. "Vanessa, I wanted to let you know that we're moving forward with the bill," Senator Miller said. "It's called the Every Child Deserves a Chance Act, and it's based heavily on the work you've been doing. We want to make sure that no child is left behind because of an outdated disciplinary system." Vanessa was speechless for a moment, her heart racing. "A national bill? This is incredible." Senator Miller chuckled. "It's long overdue, but we need your help to rally support. The bill will face opposition from those who believe in tough discipline. So we need the voices of parents, teachers, and advocates like you to push this through." Vanessa didn't hesitate. She knew this was the opportunity they had been working toward, a chance to change the system on a national level. Over the next few months, she threw herself into the campaign, speaking at rallies, organizing petitions, and meeting with lawmakers to build support for the bill. The journey was difficult, filled with opposition from those who believed the old ways were the only ways, but Vanessa's persistence paid off. The voices of parents, educators, and students from across the country began to sway the conversation. And finally, after months of campaigning, the Every Child Deserves a Chance Act was passed in Congress. Vanessa stood on the steps of the Capitol building, surrounded by the parents and advocates who had fought alongside her. As she watched the bill become law, tears of joy filled her eyes. It was a monumental victory, not just for her, but for every child in the country. Ethan had watched his mother's work with pride over the years. He had grown up seeing her fight for justice, not just for him, but for children everywhere. Now, as he prepared to graduate high school, Ethan was more determined than ever to follow in her footsteps. During his senior year, Ethan had become a mentor for younger students, just as he had once been for Daniel. He helped students who were struggling, offering guidance and support as they navigated the challenges of school life. His empathy and leadership had made him a role model, and his teachers often praised him for his dedication to making the school a better place. But Ethan's ambitions didn't stop there. One evening, as Vanessa was preparing dinner, Ethan sat down at the kitchen table, his face serious. "Mama, I've been thinking a lot about my future," he began, glancing at her nervously. Vanessa turned to him, smiling warmly. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" "I want to go into education," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I want to become a teacher, but not just any teacher. I want to work with kids who are struggling, kids who need someone to believe in them, the way you believed in me." Vanessa's heart swelled with pride, tears welling up in her eyes. "Ethan, that's incredible. You're going to change so many lives." Ethan smiled, his eyes filled with determination. "I just want to make sure that no kid ever feels the way I did back then. I want to be the kind of teacher who helps them see their potential." As Ethan prepared for college, Vanessa knew that his future was bright. He had inherited her passion for justice, and she was certain that he would carry the torch forward, continuing the work they had started together. Years passed, and the work Vanessa had begun with Every Child Matters continued to expand. Schools across the country had embraced the reforms, and the national education system had undergone a transformation. Restorative justice practices became the standard, and punitive exclusionary discipline was being phased out. Vanessa's legacy was not only in the laws that had been passed or the policies that had been changed. It was in the lives of the children who had been given a second chance. Children who had once been isolated, punished, or silenced were now thriving in environments that nurtured their strengths and supported their emotional well-being. One day, Vanessa returned to Lincoln Elementary, the place where it had all begun. The school had changed so much since her battle there, and it now stood as a shining example of what a compassionate, inclusive education system could look like. As she walked through the hallways, she passed by a mural that the students had painted, a vibrant display of diversity, with children of all backgrounds holding hands beneath a banner that read, "Every Child Matters." Vanessa smiled, tears filling her eyes as she looked at the mural. This was what she had fought for. This was the future she had dreamed of. Standing in front of the mural, Vanessa felt a deep sense of peace. She had started this journey as a mother fighting for her son, but along the way, she had found her purpose. She had become an advocate, a leader, and a force for change. And as she looked around at the thriving, joyful children in the school, Vanessa knew that her legacy would live on, not just in the policies she had helped change, but in the hearts of the children who now had the chance to grow, learn, and shine. The day had finally come. Ethan was about to begin his career as a teacher. After years of studying education and working with various programs that focused on helping students with diverse learning needs, he was ready to take his place at the front of the classroom. Vanessa couldn't have been prouder as she helped him get ready for his first day. She watched as he packed his bag with lesson plans, markers, and notebooks, his face a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. "You're going to be amazing, Ethan," Vanessa said, smiling as she handed him a thermos of coffee. "Just remember, you're not just teaching them subjects, you're helping them see their worth." Ethan nodded, his eyes serious but determined. "I know, Mama. I've been thinking about this for years, and I want to make sure every student in my class knows they matter." That afternoon, as Ethan stood in front of his first group of students, he felt a sense of purpose wash over him. He introduced himself, smiling warmly at the young faces, looking up at him with curiosity. "Mr. Parker," he began, "and I'm here to help you learn, but more importantly, I'm here to help you see how incredible you are. In this classroom, every one of you matters, and we're going to learn together, support each other, and grow as a team." The students smiled back, and Ethan could feel the excitement building in the room. This was what he had always wanted, to create a space where every child could thrive. As the weeks went on, Ethan quickly became a favorite teacher among his students. He used the same restorative justice principles that had transformed his own school experience, focusing on building relationships and understanding each student's individual needs. He created a classroom environment where everyone felt safe to express themselves, ask questions, and take risks. One day, after a particularly challenging class, Ethan sat at his desk, reflecting on how far he had come. He pulled out a photograph of him and Vanessa from his high school graduation and smiled. Everything he had learned, everything he had fought for, had led him to this moment. Ethan knew that the journey wasn't always easy, but he was ready. He had his mother's strength, her determination, and her unwavering belief that every child deserved a chance. And now it was his turn to pass that message on. While Ethan was busy shaping the minds of his students, Vanessa continued her work with Every Child Matters. But she began to feel that her next challenge was on the horizon. Her advocacy work had taken her all over the country, but she wanted to ensure that the changes she had fought for were sustained for future generations. One evening, while she was reviewing the latest reports from various school districts, Vanessa received a call from an unexpected source. It was Governor Allison Moore, a progressive leader who had been following Vanessa's work closely. "Vanessa, I've been meaning to talk to you for a while," the governor began. "Your work with education reform has been incredible, and we're seeing real results because of it. But I think you're capable of even more." Vanessa raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I'm running for re-election next year, and I want to expand my platform to focus more on educational equity and reform," Governor Moore explained. I'd like you to join my team as a special advisor. With your experience and passion, we could make even bigger strides, not just in schools, but at the state level." Vanessa was taken aback. She had never imagined herself working in politics, but the idea of influencing education policy on a broader scale was compelling. This was an opportunity to make systemic change, something that could impact countless children across the state. "I'm honored, Governor," Vanessa said after a moment of reflection. "Let's talk more about this. I'm ready to help make a difference." As Vanessa began preparing for her new role, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had spent years fighting for individual schools and communities, but now she had the chance to shape policy at the highest levels. It was a daunting task, but Vanessa was ready. As Vanessa and Ethan continued their work in different spheres, the ripple effect of their efforts became more evident. Communities that had once struggled with outdated disciplinary practices were now flourishing under the new restorative models. Children who had once felt alienated were thriving in supportive environments that fostered growth, empathy, and learning. One such community was Lakeside High School, a school that had faced serious issues with suspensions and dropouts. After implementing the changes advocated by Every Child Matters, the school saw a dramatic shift in both behavior and academic success.
Vanessa was invited to visit the school to see the progress for herself.
As she walked through the halls, she was struck by how different the atmosphere felt from the schools she had visited years ago. The students were engaged, teachers were interacting positively with their classes, and there was a sense of mutual respect that permeated the entire building. During her visit, Vanessa met with Mr. Roberts, the principal who had spearheaded the reforms. "Vanessa, I can't thank you enough for what you've done, Mr. Roberts said. Before we adopted restorative practices, this school was in crisis. But now, we're seeing students who were once on the verge of dropping out become leaders. It's been a complete transformation." Vanessa smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "This is what it's all about," she said. "When we create spaces where kids feel supported, they can achieve incredible things. Thank you for believing in the process." Later, Vanessa sat in on a class where a group of students was leading a peer mediation session, one of the new programs that had been introduced as part of the reform. The students were discussing how to resolve conflicts peacefully, offering suggestions and sharing their own experiences. One student, Jasmine, spoke up. "I used to get in trouble all the time for talking back or getting frustrated," she said. "But now, I feel like people listen to me. I'm learning how to deal with things in a better way, and it's made a huge difference." Vanessa's heart swelled as she listened. Jasmine's story was a testament to the power of restorative justice and the work they had done to create lasting change. As Ethan settled into his teaching career, his passion for education reform only deepened. He saw firsthand the impact that his classroom could have on young minds, and he wanted to extend that influence beyond his own school. He began speaking at local education events, sharing his experiences and encouraging other young teachers to adopt restorative practices in their classrooms. His enthusiasm and relatability made him a popular speaker, and soon he was invited to participate in larger conferences. One day, Ethan was approached by Dr. Miriam Brown, the director of a national teacher training program. "Ethan, I've been following your work, Dr." Brown said after one of his talks. "Your approach to classroom management is exactly what we need to be teaching new educators. I'd like you to join our program as a guest instructor and help train the next generation of teachers." Ethan was thrilled by the opportunity. "I'd love that," he replied. "If we can get more teachers to embrace these methods, we can change the way education works across the country." As Ethan began working with the training program, he realized just how important it was to pass on what he had learned. He saw young teachers come into the field with fresh ideas, but without the tools to manage their classrooms in a way that fostered connection and growth. Through his work as an instructor, Ethan was able to provide those tools, empowering new teachers to build classrooms that were both structured and compassionate. Years passed, and the work that Vanessa and Ethan had started continued to spread across the country. The success of Every Child Matters had sparked a movement, and more schools were adopting restorative justice, equity-based teaching methods, and mental health support systems. Vanessa's role as an advisor to the governor had expanded her influence even further. She was now working on statewide initiatives that focused on improving access to quality education in underserved communities. Her voice had become one of the most respected in education reform, and she was frequently called upon to consult on national policies. Meanwhile, Ethan's influence within the teaching community continued to grow. He had become a respected voice in education, not just as a teacher, but as a mentor to new educators. His work with teacher training programs had made a tangible difference, and he was widely regarded as one of the most innovative young teachers in the country. One day, as Vanessa and Ethan sat together on the porch of Vanessa's home, reflecting on everything they had achieved, Vanessa smiled softly. "We've come a long way," she said, her voice filled with pride. "But there's still so much more to do." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, but I think we've shown people what's possible. And that's the most important part. Change starts with just one voice." Vanessa looked at her son, seeing the man he had become, the compassionate, driven teacher who had taken up her fight and made it his own. She knew that the future was in good hands. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the horizon, Vanessa and Ethan sat quietly, knowing that their work was far from over, but also knowing that they had already made a lasting difference. And as long as they continued to fight for what was right, the possibilities were endless. The impact of Vanessa and Ethan's work had continued to ripple throughout the education system, and soon their efforts caught the attention of the highest levels of government. Vanessa received a formal invitation to the White House Education Summit, an annual event where policymakers, educators, and advocates gathered to discuss the future of education in America. Vanessa had spoken at countless conferences and events, but the summit represented a new level of recognition. It was an opportunity to directly influence the direction of the nation's education policy, and the invitation was a testament to the power of the movement she had helped build. On the day of the summit, Vanessa arrived at the White House with Ethan by her side. As they walked through the grand halls, she couldn't help but think about how far they had come from fighting against a single school's policies to standing at the epicenter of national education reform. During the summit, Vanessa took her place on a panel with some of the most influential voices in education. The conversation was focused on the future of restorative justice practices in schools, and Vanessa shared the story of Every Child Matters and how it had transformed communities across the country. "The truth is," Vanessa said, addressing the audience, "education is about more than just teaching subjects. It's about teaching children to believe in themselves. When we support students emotionally and mentally, when we show them that they matter, we give them the tools to succeed not just in school, but in life." Her words were met with applause, and as the panel concluded, several lawmakers and officials approached Vanessa, eager to discuss how they could implement her ideas at a national level. Ethan, standing nearby, couldn't help but beam with pride. His mother had started as a fierce advocate for him, but now she was advocating for children all over the country. She was making history. As Every Child Matters continued to grow, so did the challenges. Some communities were resistant to change, clinging to traditional punitive disciplinary methods. Vanessa found herself increasingly involved in debates with those who believed that tough discipline was the only way to manage classrooms. They argued that removing harsh punishments would lead to chaos, and that students needed to learn the hard way. Vanessa knew these challenges well. She had faced them from the very beginning of her fight for Ethan, and now she was facing them on a larger scale. But she remained steadfast in her belief that restorative justice and empathy were the keys to unlocking a child's potential. One particular challenge arose when a major school district in the South resisted the implementation of restorative practices, despite overwhelming evidence of their effectiveness in other districts. The district's board members argued that their community had different values and that the reforms would undermine authority in the classroom. Vanessa traveled to the district to meet with the board members and teachers, determined to convince them of the benefits of change. She shared stories from schools where students had once been labeled as troublemakers but had flourished under the new system. She brought data that showed how suspensions and dropouts had decreased, while academic performance and engagement had improved. "I understand that change is hard," Vanessa said during the meeting, her voice calm but firm. "But if we want our children to succeed, we need to create environments where they feel supported, not afraid. Discipline should be about guidance, not punishment. It's about helping students see that they are more than their mistakes." The debate was intense, but by the end of the meeting, several board members had softened. One of them, Mr. Jameson, a veteran educator who had initially been skeptical, approached Vanessa afterward. "I'll admit, I wasn't sold on this at first, Mr. Jameson said, his tone thoughtful, "but you've given me a lot to think about. Maybe we've been too focused on controlling kids and not enough on helping them grow." Vanessa smiled. "That's all I ask, that we take a step back and think about what's best for the kids. It's never too late to change." By the end of the year, the district had begun piloting restorative justice programs in several schools. Vanessa knew it would be a long road, but the progress was undeniable. The conversation was changing, and that was the first step toward lasting reform. As Vanessa's influence continued to grow, she found herself in a new role mentoring young advocates who were inspired by her work. Parents, teachers, and students alike sought her guidance, eager to learn how they could bring about change in their own communities. One of those young advocates was Sophie Adams, a passionate college student studying education and social justice. Sophie had been following Vanessa's work since high school and had reached out, asking if she could intern with Every Child Matters. During their first meeting, Sophie was nervous but excited. "I've been following your work for years, Mrs. Parker," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "I want to be part of this movement. I want to help change the system for kids like me, kids who felt like they didn't belong." Vanessa smiled, remembering how she had once felt just as nervous and unsure of her own power. "You're already part of the movement, Sophie. By speaking up, you're making a difference." Under Vanessa's mentorship, Sophie quickly grew into a confident advocate. She traveled with Vanessa to meetings, helped organize events, and even began giving talks of her own. Her energy and passion reminded Vanessa of herself when she first started fighting for Ethan, and it was clear that Sophie had a bright future ahead. During one of their last meetings before Sophie graduated, Vanessa gave her a piece of advice that had guided her throughout her own journey. "Never underestimate the power of your voice," Vanessa said. "Even when it feels like no one is listening, keep speaking up. You never know who's hearing your words and how they might be inspired by them." Sophie nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I won't forget that. Thank you, Mrs. Parker. You've changed my life." Vanessa watched as Sophie went on to launch her own advocacy campaign, focused on reforming education policies in underfunded urban schools. It was a reminder that the fight was being carried forward, not just by Vanessa, but by a new generation of leaders. As Every Child Matters gained international recognition, Vanessa began receiving invitations to speak at global conferences on education reform. Countries around the world were struggling with similar issues: outdated disciplinary practices, unequal access to education, and the need for more inclusive teaching methods. One of the most impactful invitations came from the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO. They wanted Vanessa to be a keynote speaker at their Global Education Summit, where leaders from over 50 countries would gather to discuss the future of education worldwide. Vanessa felt both honored and overwhelmed. The summit represented the culmination of everything she had worked for, and it was an opportunity to take her message to a global audience. During her speech, Vanessa spoke not just about the changes she had helped bring about in the U.S., but about the universal need for empathy and understanding in education. She emphasized that every child, no matter where they were in the world, deserved to feel valued and supported. "Education is the foundation of our future," Vanessa said, her voice resonating through the large conference hall. "But it's not enough to teach facts and figures. We must teach compassion, resilience, and the belief that every child has something unique to offer." When we create environments that nurture those qualities, we're not just preparing students for school, we're preparing them for life. Her speech was met with a standing ovation, and Vanessa left the summit knowing that her work had now reached a global stage. The fight for educational equity and justice was no longer confined to one country, it was a movement that spanned the globe. Years later, Vanessa found herself back where it all began, at Lincoln Elementary, the school where she had first stood up for Ethan and challenged the system that had failed him. The school had been transformed in the years since, becoming a model for restorative justice and inclusive education. The hallways were filled with laughter and energy, and the students walked with a confidence that was once absent. Vanessa had been invited to the school's annual Student Achievement Day, a celebration of the students' academic and personal growth. As she walked through the halls, she passed by a group of students who were part of a peer mentoring program that had been inspired by Ethan's own work as a mentor years ago. One of the students, Maya, approached Vanessa with a shy smile. "Are you Mrs. Parker? My teacher told us about you. She said you helped make this school what it is today." Vanessa smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I guess you could say that. But it wasn't just me. It was a lot of people working together to make things better." Maya's eyes lit up. "I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to help people." Vanessa knelt down to meet Maya's eyes. "You already are helping, just by being kind and standing up for what's right. Keep doing that, and you'll change the world." As the ceremony began, Vanessa took her seat in the audience, watching as the students were called up to receive their awards. When Ethan's name was announced as a special guest speaker, Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't known he would be speaking. Ethan stood at the podium, looking out at the young faces in the crowd. He spoke about his own journey, how he had once been a scared little boy, isolated and unsure of himself, but how his mother's fight for him had given him the courage to believe in himself. "My mom taught me that we all have the power to make a difference," Ethan said, his voice steady. "No matter how small we feel, no matter how big the challenges seem, we can create change. We can lift each other up, and that's what I want each of you to remember. You matter, and your voice matters." As Ethan finished his speech, Vanessa felt tears in her eyes. It was a full-circle memento reminder of how far they had come and how much they had accomplished together. The world had changed because of their fight, and the future was brighter than ever. As the ceremony ended and the students filed out, Vanessa and Ethan walked together through the halls of Lincoln Elementary, side by side. They had started this journey together, and they would continue it, forever fighting for the belief that every child, everywhere, deserved a chance to shine. Richard's death had left a hole in Edith's life, one that she had tried to fill with routine and solitude. But now, with Rachel and the girls in her life, Edith realized that she didn't have to carry that weight alone anymore. One afternoon, as Edith sat in the garden with a cup of tea, she found herself thinking about Richard. She missed him every day, missed his laugh, his warmth, the way he had always made her feel safe and loved. But for the first time in a long time, Edith felt a sense of peace when she thought of him, peace in knowing that he would have been proud of her for everything she had done to help Rachel and the girls. As she sipped her tea, Edith decided it was time to visit Richard's grave. She hadn't been in a while, and she felt a strong pull to go to tell him about everything that had happened, about the new life she had found after all these years. The next day, Edith drove to the cemetery where Richard was buried. The drive was quiet, the fall colors painting the landscape in shades of gold and red. When she arrived, Edith made her way to Richard's headstone, a small smile on her face as she placed a bouquet of fresh roses at his grave. "Hello, love," she said softly, her voice filled with affection. "It's been a while, but I've been busy. I have so much to tell you." For the next hour, Edith sat by Richard's grave, telling him about Rachel, about the girls, about everything that had happened since they had moved into the neighborhood. She talked about how she had found new strength within herself, how she had made new friends, and how she had learned that it was never too late to make a difference in someone's life. "I think you'd be proud of me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I've still got a lot of life left to live, and I'm going to make the most of it. I'll carry your love with me, always." As Edith stood to leave, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She knew that Richard was still with her, in spirit, and that his love would continue to guide her in the days ahead. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. As the winter holidays approached, Cedar Street came alive with the warm glow of twinkling lights and the festive spirit of the season. Edith, who had once dreaded the long, lonely winter months, now found herself filled with a sense of anticipation and joy. The neighborhood had changed so much in the past few months, and Edith felt more connected to her community than ever before. Rachel and the girls had invited Edith to spend Christmas with them in their new apartment, and Edith had gladly accepted. It was a far cry from the quiet, solitary holidays she had spent in years past, and she was looking forward to celebrating with people she cared about. On Christmas Eve, Edith arrived at Rachel's apartment with a basket full of gifts and homemade treats. The girls greeted her at the door, their faces bright with excitement, and Edith couldn't help but laugh as they pulled her inside. "We've been waiting for you," Lily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with joy. Mom made hot chocolate. Edith's heart swelled with affection as she followed the girls into the cozy living room where Rachel was waiting with a warm smile. The apartment was decorated with twinkling lights and a small Christmas tree, and the air was filled with the comforting scent of cinnamon and pine. "Welcome, Edith," Rachel said, hugging her tightly. "We're so glad you're here." "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else," Edith replied, her voice full of warmth. As they sat together by the fire, sipping hot chocolate and exchanging stories, Edith felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had been missing for so long, a sense of connection, of belonging, of family. The evening passed in a blur of laughter, conversation, and warmth. The girls opened their presents with wide-eyed excitement, and Edith marveled at how far they had come since the dark days of living under Derek's control. They were happy, healthy, and full of life, and Edith knew that Rachel had done an incredible job of creating a safe, loving home for them. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Rachel and Edith sat together by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past year. "It feels like a lifetime ago," Rachel said quietly, her eyes focused on the flickering flames. "Sometimes I still can't believe we made it out." "But we did." "You did," Edith corrected gently. "You found the strength to leave, and now you and the girls have a bright future ahead of you." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You were there when I needed someone the most, and I'll never forget that." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "We've been there for each other, and we'll keep being there, no matter what comes next." As they sat together in the quiet of the night, Edith felt a deep sense of peace settling over her. The storm was over, and now it was time to move forward to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that they had all found the strength to survive and thrive. And in that moment, Edith knew that everything would be all right. Thank you for following along with Edith's emotional and inspiring journey. If you found this story moving or relatable, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more powerful stories like this. We'll be bringing you more heartwarming tales of resilience, community, and the strength of the human spirit. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll always be the first to know when new content is available. We value your feedback, so if you enjoyed this story, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us all that no matter how hard things get, we are never truly alone.